Next slide. I'll get into a little bit of the law. The law, I took a couple of statutes and I thought were important because things have been talked about quite a bit. And there seemed to be a little bit of maybe confusion by some people. I got a call from one of our business people in town and said, a woman walked in front of my car today and started slamming on the hood of my car, demanding that I stop for her. And she was in the middle of the street, and that the law requires that I stop for her. And she wanted to know what the law was. So I talked to her about that, calmed her down, and then I thought tonight I'd show a little bit about that. And I picked two statutes in particular, crossing at crosswalks and crossing at non-crosswalks. So the statute here, pedestrians crossing right away at crosswalks. And we've got gentlemen walking, probably 4th of July, got the flags out. Here, a whole lot of laws there, a whole lot of parts of this statute. So I took two in particular and highlighted them. The first part, pedestrians right away at crosswalks. That A part, the driver of a vehicle shall stop and yield the right of way to a pedestrian crossing the roadway within a crosswalk. And again, another portion of this that I thought was important, when the pedestrian is upon the half of the roadway upon which the vehicle is traveling. So that essentially is kind of like the comparison with a school bus on a divided highway, where there's a two-lane thing. The stop is required on the side where the bus is departing or unloading. Same thing here. The drivers are required to stop when the pedestrian is upon the half of the roadway upon which the vehicle is traveling. Thought that was important to point out. As well as B, no pedestrian shall suddenly leave a curb or other place of safety and walk or run to the path of a moving vehicle, which is so close as to constitute a hazard. Well, someone jumping out to say, hey, I wonder if I can get him to stop. That's a violation. We've seen that a little bit. A couple of years ago, we saw that in the CBD. Kids trying to do that, playing a game of chicken. Clearly the burden is on the pedestrian.
Just in case there are people watching at home, could you read what C says too? Because I looked at this morning also, and I thought C was pretty important.
Yeah, paragraph C says that paragraph A shall not apply under the conditions when a vehicle is stopped at a marked crosswalk or at any unmarked crosswalk. At an intersection permit a pedestrian to cross the roadway. The driver of any other vehicle approaching from the rear shall not overtake and pass such stopped vehicle. So, to your example, someone stopped for a pedestrian at 47th and 9th. If they pass that vehicle, they're clearly in violation.
But cars coming the other way don't have to stop until the pedestrian gets to their half of the crosswalk?
Correct.
Really?
Correct.
So what was the change in the law that used to have to yield?
The word stop, shall stop and yield. There used to be just yield.
Okay.
So the word stop was added. So the law really didn't change substantially, except it was solidified a little bit and clarified. And even to the next one, we'll move on to the next one, the crossing at other than crosswalks. 11-1003 says that every pedestrian, well, again, a long statute, and I took out a section that I thought was appropriate for this discussion tonight, is that A, every pedestrian crossing a roadway at any point other than within a marked crosswalk or within an unmarked crosswalk at an intersection shall yield the right of way to vehicles upon the roadway. So this clearly puts the burden on the pedestrians to yield to the vehicles. And there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding from people that I think California is a state where pedestrians just rule. Under any circumstances, Illinois is not one of those states. Pedestrians still do have some obligations and burdens. That's the reason I brought this up for this discussion tonight. Pedestrian crossing stings. We did 3 of them, each one with 2 stings a night, and I did a little summary of them. So we did 3 stings at 47th and 9th specifically since November of 2010. The focus was the morning rush hours and then again after 7:30 p.m. We were funded by the JAG grants. We were able to divert officers from what we had applied for truck enforcement. We diverted them, got permission from the Judicial Advisory Council to focus on this. We did 2 each day. That represented 27 hours of total enforcement, and we saw 10 citations. 8 were given tickets and 2 were given warnings. Most of the violations we observed were between 7:30 p.m. and 8:30 p.m. And the officers noted in their after-action reports that the vast majority of motorists were in compliance. There were significantly more motorists in compliance than non-compliance. We've done other things as well. 47th and 9th wasn't the only place we've done them other times randomly, and officers will do them self-directed on a patrol. If they have their random time, their free access time, they'll do them as well. Enforcement of LaGrange. We have continued vigilance. Our focus on all pedestrian crossing locations. We're also focusing quite a bit on our railroad crossings. We're very pleased with our level of enforcement, level of compliance. You'll see over the last several years a decline in the number of tickets we've written for railroad crossing violations, for example. That's not because we're seeing less violations. Well, I take that back. It's not because we're writing less tickets, I misspoke. It's because we're seeing less violations. Similarly, off of traffic, but on parking. We are also writing less parking violations in the last couple of years because we have a higher level of compliance in our CBD. And I think that was kind of represented by the increase in permit requests and sticker requests. So people say, well, you wrote less tickets last year. Get on the stick, let's go. Well, we're seeing a higher level of compliance, and especially at the railroad crossings. And the last point there is our ongoing speed checks with not only moving radar, stationary radar, and the continued use of our speed signs, which are very popular. People are quite happy with those. And the last point that we're talking about is educating the public. We've done education at the railroad stops for a long time. That's been a constant. And community presentations like this also help. We did our first LaGrange Citizens Police Academy, which was unbelievably well received and successful. We plan to do that again this year. We also do school presentations. A couple days a week we'll have an officer at LT High School. We also go and do bike rodeos at the grade schools, and we talk to them about bike safety, pedestrian safety, and traffic safety. So we continue to do that. We're also going to expand our presentations to do distracted driver presentations. Well, so everybody's done simulators, driving in school, whatever you had when you got into the car. We found a new program, and we're going to propose with the remaining funds in our judicial advisory grant that we're allowed to spend some money and purchase a program for distracted driving. One of the St. Francis parents called me and said this is a kind of a topic that they had been discussing. We agreed. We had already been thinking about it. So we did do some research on it. We found a great program on distracted driving. And that's everything from too many people in the car, texting, cell phones, any kind of distracted driving. And the last one is we're trying to develop a program on commuter education on all of our safe routes. So we're talking about some handouts that we can generate for people walking to the train stations, for distribution through the schools on people using the safe routes. We work with the schools every year to refine or alter or amend the walking routes if needed, or the travel routes, the pickup routes, the drop-off routes. And we're thinking about doing a handout or brochure for our adult pedestrians who use the crosswalks and anywhere around our business district or especially our metro stops in particular. And we've also been talking to the library about partnering with them on doing some presentations in the library. And that concludes my portion of the presentation, unless there's questions.
I do. Chief, could you go back to your crosswalk sting slide, please? Can you describe your methodology for conducting those stings?
We hide and grab them. We have police officers who are on adjacent blocks, and we have police officers in plain clothes who walk out into the street.
So if I'm reading that fourth point, during 27 hours of enforcement, 8 citations and 2 warning tickets were issued. That's roughly every 3 hours you have a violation? Is that what that says?
If you put it in those terms, but that's not how it was. They were mostly bunched up between 7:30 and 8:30 where we saw those. Yes. They were pretty much grouped together.
So when I go to that intersection, I spend 20 minutes crossing the street, and I have to hit the button a couple times in order for a car to stop, I should say. A violation has occurred or not? Now I know you weren't there, so you couldn't tell me exactly what I did and what the cars did, but I can't believe it takes roughly 3 hours on average for a violation to occur.
I don't have an explanation. Just because we weren't there doesn't mean that a violation didn't occur. And I certainly know that if I put a marked police car by a stop sign, the number of violations is going to be really low. And I'm not naive that when we pull away, a violation will occur. I also know that when driving in the car with the red and blue lights on the top, I see some of the best examples of driving you'll ever want to see. People wave at you.
I'm sure you do. How about an unmarked car?
Unmarked car, I get run off the road like everybody else. I get cut into the curb like you do. And
No, I'm saying, were you to do your sting with an unmarked car?
We did. These cars, these cars weren't parked on 47th Street with the red lights going, and we set a guy with a pair of blue jeans across the street. They were secreted. They were not in plain view. Yes, we did not see a lot of violations. Are there times when there are more than others? Absolutely. Do we understand it? Yeah. But along with any traffic enforcement program, we hope there's a partnership with the community that recognizes we're not 100% efficient at 100% of the location. We recognize that there are violations of varying levels that occur all over the village, but we can't get them all.
Thank you.
Chief, I appreciate the talk you gave. I think it was real informative. I'll quibble with one point, and that is the statute you picked out in this California example. Illinois does have a statute that says the driver has to exercise due care regardless of where the pedestrian's crossing. So I won't get into a debate on who has, if it goes and there's a pedestrian hit, it's an unfortunate thing. But drivers shouldn't take, the takeaway for drivers shouldn't be like, hey, if they're not in the road, I don't have to worry about it.
No, and to your point, even a pedestrian that has violated that statute, a motorist that strikes that pedestrian will still be cited for failing to yield to the pedestrian. So, correct.
Hey, Mike, help me draw some conclusions from the data. So we saw the speed study stuff earlier. Is it your opinion that 47th, the people are traveling within what we call an acceptable speed range, or do you think there's still work to be done to get the speed lower?
No, I'm pretty happy with the speed range. I'm pretty happy with the average speed at 33. I mean, any violation is a violation. 1 mile an hour technically is a violation, but then there's that level of the discretion. At what point? So if you ask people who live on 47th Street, they're going to tell me 33 gets a ticket. The reality of it is a ticket that is 10 or under doesn't even see the light of day in court. It's tossed out faster than we can. I don't know. I'm not trying to throw blame or shift anywhere else. I'm just kind of telling you the reality of it is. But when we see that 85% of the vehicles are going at 38% or low, and the average speed is 33 and a 30, that looks like a pretty good result for us.
Okay, and the reason I asked is the KOA guys thought that was a little bit high for that profile on the road, so I was just curious if you felt the same way, because there seems, that was, I recall their opinion, I wrote that down from the meeting, that they thought that 85th percentile, that speed was a little bit high for that profile. So based on that, are you going to recommend doing anything different than we're doing today relative to enforcement, or are you comfortable that speed's okay and that the enforcement that we do today is what we should be doing going forward?
In the ideal, we would do much more enforcement at all the locations. But given the call demands and the demands on our time, I think we were doing a kind of a remarkable job, and I'm pretty impressed with the staff with the call demand continuing to go up and up and up. That they're able to, especially the last couple of years in particular, raise the bar on the number of enforcement efforts that they've had. In the ideal, though, yeah.
So if we could find money in the budget to get you more police time, or more part-time policing to dedicate towards this, you wouldn't say no. You wouldn't say I don't need it because everything's going.
Probably not a police chief in the U.S. that would say no to more enforcement. Yeah, you could definitely do a lot more, but given the numbers that we have the same staff numbers since the late 80s, I believe, where when we were doing 10 or 12,000 calls. When I think probably in the 80s, LaGrange was known as the traffic Hades. But call volume's gone up, and with some of those successes, there's been the demands on our time. And as you mentioned earlier, even the central business district, just by call demand, is almost its own police beat right now. But we've still been able to balance that. We think the best we can with that kind of that 80-20 split. By the way, in the ideal, that would be about 60-40. 60% committed time, 40% non-committed time.
To clarify something for the chief and everybody else is with the KLOA study, what they simply said was that your numbers are at the 85th percentile. It's 33 for the average, 38.5 as it relates to that. I don't think they made necessarily a value judgment, and if they did it in absolute terms, where they're saying you have X number of violations above the posted speed limit of 30. And obviously there's different factors that go into that, as the chief described in terms of, well, there's the enforcement aspect of it, and there's the judicial aspect of it. So I think that's the context of what KLOA was saying.
And we do see the oddball speed in there once in a while, the over 40 or something like that. A lot of those we think are probably ambulances, police cars, and maybe emergency response type of thing. We don't see a lot. In fact, on that one study, which was, I think, over 16,000 vehicles, there was maybe eight or nine vehicles that went over 40. And that was, I think that was a 6-day time capture, if I'm not mistaken. So,
Chief, over a 10-year period, is there a major roadway in LaGrange, statistically now, that stands out? We've talked a lot about 47th Street, but is there from a law enforcement statistical standpoint, is there a winner in terms of volume or citations that we should be aware of over the long term?
no, I think that maybe I could capture the top three, which are Ogden Avenue, LaGrange Road, and 47. Those are the top three. Ogden Avenue obviously has its own unique characteristic to it. Pedestrians or students walking are significantly closer to the roadway than they are on 47th Street. Well, that's a concern for us. And some of our intersections, especially closer to the tracks, where they tend to back up. We spend a lot of time with trying to keep vehicles moving when Ogden and LaGrange Road would back up in the evening rush hour. And you may have been the victim of that yourself, where you've got cars that I'm not going to be stopped for one more light. I'll just creep across, and then they wind up blocking 2 eastbound lanes of traffic. So we spent some time going over there handing out coupons, tickets.
Chief, I'm sorry, Trustee Lang just mentioned, do you guys track what percentage are residents versus non-residents getting moving violations?
No. I could tell you just anecdotally,
Sure.
the majority are residents that are committing, but then getting tickets or committing violations.
I guess either way. And I understand your difference there.
The majority of the violators are probably our own residents.
You have to tell me if this is an outlandish idea. Having these traffic stops, could we have volunteers pushing the button, and the car either stops or doesn't stop when the light's flashing, and the officers and their squad cars, so we decrease the number of officers that are necessary?
I guess we could do a lot of what ifs, but with the amount of time we spent there versus the number of violations we saw, I had to question the best use of our resources, especially when they were limited.
I absolutely agree, especially with these numbers. It's just hard, I think, for us to believe up here as we've hit those numbers, hit that button to go to Sedgwick Park or for whatever purposes, and the cars don't appear to stop for us, that if you did it again, you wouldn't, and again, they may come the exact same way. It's just surprising, I think, for us to hear. Not that it, wouldn't happen, it's just surprising.
Well, Mike, in that situation, if cars were crossing in that particular location on the other 2 lanes, and you were in these 2 lanes, is that a violation?
No.
So I think that might be the difference in perception, Mark, is that if you're crossing in these 2 lanes and cars are flying by in the other 2 lanes, it's not a violation.
Well, should our yellow light be flashing? I mean, that becomes the issue now with how we're interpreting the law and the yellow light. If we don't want if cars don't have to stop, but we want them to stop, where does it go? And I don't know the answer to that question, but to me, the yellow light's flashing. I think that the idea is cars are supposed to stop.
Yeah, that's my interpretation, but I think what we're hearing from the chief is that if you're not in the other half, if you can cross the yellow line on the other side of the road, that's not a violation until that point, right?
Correct.
I mean, that,
And if it's a community perception that everything should stop in both directions, then that would account for quite a few of the misconceptions.
yeah, that's, I think that's it. In my view, I mean, people out there.
If traffic isn't stopping, you better not cross.
Right, yeah, but you sort of have a chicken and egg theory here. People are expecting cars to stop before they cross, and then.
But no matter what, I mean, if I can't imagine a pedestrian under any circumstances at any location so distracted or such a high level of expectation that they're going to have ability to have people just come to a screeching halt for them. Pedestrians still have to be aware. You know, the emergency rooms are reporting a significant increase in pedestrian injuries due to distracted driving. Pedestrians walking, texting. There was, you know, I saw that YouTube video about a woman walked into a pond in a mall while she was texting. So pedestrians still have to be aware. But, you know, you see so many people there, they're just charging to go to the train or back, whatever the case may be, and I'm not finger pointing here, but pedestrians still do have, I don't ever step out into the path of a vehicle until I have eye contact and I'm making sure that I can see that car is coming to a stop or a halt. I have no expectation of, no matter what the statute says, I'm not walking in front of a moving vehicle, period.
I think the problem we face is that we're putting crosswalks, or we're contemplating putting crosswalks at parks that are going to be frequented by 9 and 10 and 12 and 15-year-olds who aren't going to think like adults. I mean, we all know that. We all have kids of various ages. So I think we need to have a higher comfort level that there is going to be compliance in order to put those in.
I love the idea of enhancements, you know, marking your crosswalk. But it also, you know, one of the other observations that officers working those things at 47th and 9th said was maybe about 40 to 50% of the people didn't use the crosswalk. They went to 10th or 11th, and they just, you know, they did not use the crosswalk. That was fully in place with the buttons. So that was also, you know, a good majority of people who were just, I'm not going to walk. I'm not going to walk over there. I want to go here.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think some of that is because a lot of people don't feel the crosswalk's that effective. So, I mean, I think that's part of it. I kind of talked to some folks who said, I don't even bother to go the extra block down because I get the same result when I cross the street to the west. So I think there's...
Just because they built it, they didn't come.
Mike, I got to absolutely disagree, and I'll use myself as an example. I lived for 5 years in LaGrange Park and took the LaGrange Road train station and walked across Ogden Avenue. And I could have walked 1 block over to do it at LaGrange, and I never did the 1 block. It had nothing to do with me being, you know, concerned on the effectiveness of the light, and 100% me being lazy or deciding I could run. So I doubt it's the people saying, I question if that cross light will work, and that's why I'm not going to walk the block. The fact is, people don't walk a block out of their way. And
nor do they drive a block out of the way, as evidenced by Ashland, which was our #1 intersection accident for many years. And we did a restriction during rush hour because people would either try and go straight across from LaGrange to LaGrange Park, vice versa, or try and make those turns. And no matter what, we can continue to write citations there when they can go 1 block further east or 2 blocks and get the advantage of a traffic light. Why don't they do it?
Right. I think the difference at the crosswalk at 9th is it's a flashing yellow. The red lights, a signalized intersection, I think a lot of people have confidence in crossing at because cars typically stop for red lights. I think the issue we have here is this flashing yellow, people are confused. And now I think my understanding is even if you're crossing the street, until you get to the double yellow in the middle, the center line, the cars on the other side of the road aren't in non-compliance until you actually step into the lane that they're traveling in, right?
Correct. But you don't generally see that at an intersection just because of the way traffic is stopped.
That's what I'm saying. So I'm saying I would walk
At a traffic light intersection.
I would walk to the corner to go in, you know, to Mark's example. I do the same thing all the time too, instead of going across the Ashland. For that reason alone, because I think you have a much higher degree. I think it's what we had at our last discussion about trying to get the flashing reds or some better infrastructure because of that situation.
I think the line of questioning here from the board and the chief's responses have been very good and really is illustrative of the need for additional public education. I think that's the bottom line.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess, is that the conclusion, is that the enforcement that we have today has been effective, the speeds are okay, but it's just an educational thing that we need to do?
Well,
No. The short answer is no.
yeah, I don't know, you know, one traffic accident is more than we'd ever like to see. You know, one theft is more than we'd ever like to see. And one speeder is more than we'd ever like to see. But, you know, sadly, we have to do a certain level of acceptance that we can't be 100% efficient. So,
I agree.
could we do more enforcement or better enforcement with more? Or if the demands on our time are less, yes.
And you'd like to see it at 60-40 range. If you could waive the magic budget one, 60-40 would be your ideal component.
That's not what we're here for tonight? Is it? I don't know.
but
He has the
it's-
one?
I mean, you know, we've got a week and a half to talk about it, right?
Maybe,
So-
I thought, Lou says he might have the one.
Unless there are any further questions for the chief, then let's go to Lou and talk to us about the one.
Wait, before Lou waives his magic budget one, one other, I'm going to ask your gut opinion, Mike, and that is, you know, we're getting, the bottom line here is that we're getting surprisingly good compliance, at least it was surprising to me, the numbers. Even though I've seen them, I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't understand them well enough, and I very much appreciate what you all have put together here tonight. Here's my what your gut tell you. We're getting pretty good compliance now. Do we get better? Do we do ourselves a service? Do we do a good thing by putting in a couple more crossings between our borders on 47th Street?
You
We've
know,
got one now. If we did, let's say, two more.
first and foremost, I think perception plays a lot here. You know, perception of violent crime in the Chicago metro area is much higher than it truly is. But what makes the news? What leads at the 10 o'clock news, right? It's the same thing, I think, with traffic. By and large, the vast majority of the motoring public are compliant. You know, we can all drive home, you know, on your trip home tonight. You'll probably witness a couple of traffic violations. Hopefully you won't commit a couple of traffic violations, but, you know, the vast majority of the motoring public is compliant. And I think we truly see that in LaGrange. At what level may be up to debate. Is 4 over too much? Is 10 over too much? You know, that may be the debate. But I think anytime you can do an enhancement and formally identify a pedestrian crossing to your thing is better for drivers. When you do, even though we didn't get the desired requested result that we wanted on Hagen Avenue with the lowering of the speed limit, the enhancements we did with lane markings and those different signage that we did, I think made a little bit of a difference. I truly do. It wasn't what we would have wanted. It wasn't what IDOT told us we might be able to get approved. We heard a different story. But I think if you can do enhancements, markings, that anytime you can do that, that makes a better driving situation for people not familiar with our area.
Thanks.
Thanks. What the police chief has detailed are the various enhancement efforts that are currently in place.
I'm not sure your mic is
Am I not? Okay, should I just hold closer?
No, you're not.
What the police chief was detailed was various enhancements that are currently in place utilizing existing resources, which have, however, as the police chief mentioned, changed over the past couple of years. Up until 2005, traffic enforcement was included as part of the police officer's regular detail, which was enhanced by the IDOT grants for special details. In 2005, the police department added a part-time police officer program with an annual budget of $90,000 to further augment enforcement efforts. In 2010, as the chief mentioned, funding for the part-time program was reduced in half to $45,000 a year due to budgetary constraints. It's important, what I wanted to note right here was that the village has recently experienced significant deficits, primarily due to decreasing revenues resulting from the economic recession and also operating expenditures increasing at a rate in excess of our property tax limitations. 2 years ago, we had a deficit of about $600,000. Last year, that deficit grew to over $1.2 million. In order to offset the operating deficits, the village has utilized reserve funds to sustain operations over the past several years. As the village board is aware, in response to the decrease in the major revenue sources and in order for our current fiscal year expenditures to approximate our budget, the village has implemented a cost containment plan during the year to reduce operating expenditures. As personnel expenditures account for a significant portion of the general fund expenditures, the cost containment plan focuses on reducing personnel costs while attempting to maintain the current level of village services. Although a deficit is still projected for the current year of approximately $300,000, annual surpluses are projected in 3 of the next 5 fiscal years, primarily due to the cost containment plan, a gradual economic recovery, and planned revenue enhancements that are currently in the budget. With that being said, we did want to provide the village board with costs associated with enhancing police enforcement efforts. The cost of adding 1 full-time officer is approximately $100,000 a year. That includes salaries, benefits, training, and uniform. An additional officer would also require an additional car. That cost is approximately $10,000 a year to purchase the vehicle, maintenance, and for fuel. So you have an additional annual cost of about $110,000 for 1 officer. The hourly wage for a part-time police officer, as the chief mentioned, is $20 an hour. There's no additional benefits, no pension, and they do, however, receive a department uniform and are required to complete mandatory training. The cost of additional part-time officers, providing a comparable number of hours to a full-time officer, which is about 42 hours a week, is $45,000 a year. If the village board were to authorize the addition of 1 full-time officer, the financial impact at the end of our current 5-year budget would be a reduction of general fund reserves of about $550,000, or about 4% of the available reserves. If we were to enhance the allotment of hours for the part-time department, the 5-year cost would be about $225,000, or a reduction of our reserve of about 1.5%. Now, obviously, we'll be talking a lot more about the village budget, as we mentioned at the upcoming workshop, but we did want to give you that information just to help your decisions.
Any questions?
Chief, am I correct in my takeaway being that if 20% of the time a patrolman is currently spending on traffic patrol, that's about 1.6 or 1.5 hours a day?
That was uncommitted time, non-committed time, which they did. Not just traffic enforcement, that's also grabbing their lunch break. It's also maybe doing a foot patrol, that type of thing. So, but we have that has been our directive to spend the majority of your non-committed time on traffic enforcement.
Okay. So I mean, yeah. So I'm gathering, half hour for lunch, an hour. So per shift, we're looking at about 4 hours, 4 guys on the day shift doing traffic.
Approximately, yeah, for the whole shift, yes.
Okay.
If you're a officer in a car and we collaborate the village, and your job on your shift is to patrol that area, is that committed time?
No, that random patrolling time would be non-committed time. Self-directed patrol, on-duty type of thing would be non-committed time. So seeing someone up driving up and down your block would be non-committed time.
Okay, thanks.
So, Chiefs, just to clarify and summarize for everybody, with respect to full-time career staff, even though averages might be out to 1.6 hours per day because of the nature of the calls for service, you could be doing it for 10 minutes and then you get pulled off, and then that gets addressed. Then you take a lunch break and you come back, you're doing 10 more minutes, boom, you get called off to something else. Is that kind of what happens more in reality for at least career personnel?
Quite often. That's not, occasionally, it's probably more often the norm.
Okay, so we don't have the luxury of blocks of time dedicated for visible presence for traffic.
No, but by comparison, significantly different profile on Sunday mornings in LaGrange than on Tuesday mornings in LaGrange.
Mm-hmm.
So more of that opportunity on a weekend with less conventional call volume.
Yeah, and that was my questions weren't value judgment oriented, but rather just to clarify that it's we don't have these chunks of time. For part-timers, It's somewhat similar because, again, you're trying to use them to augment operations if necessary, whether it's in a CBD or an accident or something like that. But those blocks of time, you do have a little bit more benefit of that under the part-time program.
Theirs is probably the reverse. Theirs is probably like 90-10, with 90% being traffic enforcement and only 10% augmenting when we're short or when they have to back somebody up or assist on an arrest or a domestic dispute. It's probably more like 90-10 for the part-time officers, with 90 being our traffic enforcement.
Lou, I wonder if you could clarify a point you made about the cost of a full-time officer. Would that incremental full-time officer be a 25-year-old who's just finished the police academy, or is this kind of an average number of our new officers and our 15, 20-year veteran officers?
Excuse me, that would be a new officer joining the ranks of the force as a first-year police officer.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Luke? Thank you, all three of you gentlemen. I think that was extremely helpful to all of us, and hopefully the folks at home.
Can I jump in with one question?
Sure.
The one area that wasn't addressed was auxiliary police. We still use auxiliary, I believe.
Yes. Auxiliaries are unpaid non-conservators of the law, which means that they don't have arrest powers similar to the part-time. Part-time officers have the full authority and arrest authority as the full-time staff. Auxiliaries are used for pedestrian movements, parade functions, municipal checks. The second officers as ride-alongs, but they are considered by statute and by ordinance non-conservators of the law who can't issue those citations, traffic citations.
And they've been helping us. They've been helping carry us with the Central Business District as well.
Oh, unbelievable with the downtown CBD, yes.
As Mike mentioned, it's an unpaid position, but they do have an annual budget of about $10,000 to cover some minimal training, and they actually have a uniform.
But we're getting hundreds of hours, right?
There's a great statistic, and I don't know if you know what that is off the top of your head, Chief, but it's a number of hours that we receive every year from the auxiliary program.
2 full-time equivalent.
Yeah. Good say.
Chief, to Mark Kukler's point, seems like an hour ago now, could one of our auxiliary officers serve as the person crossing the street to enhance a sting operation? If we decided that we...
Yeah, if they didn't have full-time jobs, yeah. But almost all of them are full-time employees elsewhere and do this for their love of the village and generally not available to us at that kind of level.
Thank you.
Robert,
I'd ask Lieutenant Strasser, did you use a couple auxiliaries in the state?
we do have some retired ones that would be...
No, I mean, the ones that you did were there some auxiliaries in that state?
No, those were part-time.
I wasn't sure.
Mr. Plupshin, do you have anything to add before we close this matter?
Yes, just a couple of points. I'm going to significantly cut back on my summary remarks because I think the Chief's presentation and the data stands on its own. I'd like to start off with a compliment and then kind of synthesize everything for everybody, and that is the fact that we're going to this level of detail to talk about a specific operational item, I think speaks volumes about the chief and the departmental staff. I mean, it really means that we're doing all other things right, that we're sitting here talking about traffic enforcement. So I want to commend the chief and his staff for providing the core public safety services aspect of things to residents in a very cost-effective manner, and frankly, the same could be said with traffic enforcement. So thank you, Chief. So to kind of wrap this up for the board from the staff's perspective on this, I think what we're saying is that we don't believe that increasing resources for this specific purpose is the best thing or the right answer at this particular time. A lot of that is largely a function of being sensitive to village finances. We have worked, as Lou said, more like waving his magic club than his wand, that we've worked very hard to stabilize village finances by reducing personnel expenses, and that increasing funding for police services has a regressive impact on that objective. And what we're trying to do is say that let's try to keep this budget neutral, at least for now. The third component here is that we still believe that there's a significant element of engineering solution to this, especially within the 47th Street corridor. The village board has a plan. They've discussed that with us and have tasked us to do that pursuant to recent workshops, and we're in the process of effectuating that plan. And then finally, again, based on the questions that we've heard and the chief's responses, I think we also need to work on developing perhaps more very specific public education pieces and disseminate that plan accordingly. Something that's very specific to pedestrian safety and to traffic safety as well. So that kind of summarizes my comments for this evening.
Thank you, Robert. And as I said, I would, in case there's anybody in the audience who has any comment or question with respect to this part of our meeting, I would be happy to entertain you at this point in time. And if not, I don't believe that we have any other matters on the agenda. Are there any trustee comments? Trustee Cooper?
Two comments. One, related to something on the omnibus agenda, which was the First National Bank of LaGrange. I think it's a beautiful addition. I get on the train at Stone Avenue daily. It's nice to see the improvements that the bank did. So I congratulate them, and I think it's just a fantastic improvement to our village. The other matter being on this presentation, I thought it was very informative. I appreciate all the work that the police department did and the chief did. To me, it's really something that I would like to see all the department heads do, coming in, telling us this is what we spend our time on, this is how much it costs, this is why we think we should spend more time on something or less time on something. I think it was very informative as a trustee, and I would think that the people watching at home would find it informative.
Thank you, Trustee Cookman. I'm really glad you brought that up with respect to the bank in particular. A tremendous investment in our West End, and we do appreciate their every effort in that respect. Trustee Rowe.
I just want to thank the chief again and everybody that participated tonight. This was very informative. Thanks very much, and looking forward to the budget side, and you're hoping we can do some things there. But I also agree with Mark. I think it'd be great for across the departments. I think this was very, very informative to really understand kind of the workings and the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? If not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn our meeting this evening.
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And we are adjourned. Thank you very much, one and all.